All right, I'm not really excited about following all these, but at least I'm not last. Oh my gosh, all right, what a great start. So, I'm approaching this from a different angle again, right? And that's part of the beauty of this panel. So we're trying to come at this one little book from a number of different sides. So my background's in images, much earlier than this, but it's been fun playing around and trying to figure out who the owner is by looking at images of the time. And if you think about what an image says about who you are, what kind of pictures you have in your house, right? It says something about you. That's what we want to get to with Ambrose, right? What did the images of Ambrose at the time, what did they say about St. Ambrose? What sort of characteristics appealed to people during this period? And the other thing we want to look at is the patronage. Who is paying for these? Who is commissioning these sorts of images? And how might that relate to the potential owner of our book? The other thing, a background story in this book, we got to this book through an art history student. I'm plugging shamelessly art history right now. This student actually contacted me and said, hey, if I was on eBay and I saw a book you might like, and I sent it over to Father Bud, who said, yes, we do. And the rest is history. It was, what's kind of funny in the end is that surfing eBay is actually a scholarly activity now. So, not this week, so next week. All right, so, and then my colleagues thought I should probably do a flip book instead of just jumping to Venice. So that this goes long, it's their fault. You can find them here and over there. The first image we should look at is probably Ambrose himself, because it won't be very helpful in figuring it out because he's missing his flesh. But that's your patron saint right there. This comes from the crypt from the church, the Basilica of San Ambrose in Milan, and he's there in between the two saints whose remains he found, Gervasius and Protasius. I'm not sure which one is the near one. But this is the earliest image we have of St. Ambrose. All right, and what's incredible about this, and what some scholars have suggested, is that it could be a real likeness. And it's for two reasons. One is that it's within a generation or maybe two of his death. He died in 397. The other is that while some features of his appearance here are stylized, the size and shape of the eyes, for example, there are others that are peculiar to this image. If we see the shape of his lips, and the close-cropped beard, his ears. I mean, you don't see this in saint imagery. So you might actually be looking at your patron. This mosaic comes from a chapel that is connected to the Church of San Ambrose. It's a chapel dedicated to St. Victor, and that's who you see up there in the middle of the vault. In the lower zone here, we have Ambrose in the middle with Gervasius and Protasius. On the opposite side is Maternus, in between Felix and Nabor. Maternus was an earlier Nicene bishop in Rome, or in Milan, excuse me. So Ambrose's predecessor. So Ambrose is an intermediary, and he's a saint for this city. But you just saw there are a number of other saints. He will become the saint for the city of Milan. But we don't get a lot of imagery for him until we get to the Carolingian period. And what makes it even wilder is that the bishop, who is Ambrose, this is actually the artist getting crowned by Ambrose. The bishop is Frankish. The Carolingian kingdom or empire, what later became known as the Holy Roman Empire, was actually in control of Milan at this period. But Ambrose is their guy. And he is the patron saint of the bishop in particular. This is the abstinence saint from the Church of San Ambrose, and it shows an episode of Ambrose's life related to St. Martin of Tours, one of the great French saints. The other thing, though, is when we look at the image of Ambrose and his iconography is, well, here, this is a little different because it's gold and silver. It's not a California phase or something like that. It's bleaching here. This one, though, where we get the gray hair and the gray beard, it's not to show how old he was. He died probably in his 50s. This is wisdom. That is a sign of wisdom. Look for that in these next images. Well, eventually, Milan comes out from underneath the thumb of the Holy Roman Empire, and it is a kingdom of Lombardy, and Milan really is at the center of it. Ambrose is the patron saint of the city itself. So now it's not just of the church, which is where this image comes from, but of the whole city of Milan and the surrounding regions over which it holds sway. One thing to point out is how cultures will put their own stamp on images of Ambrose. And here we see this throne with animal heads at the end. There's nothing Christian about that. You don't find that in other bishops' thrones. This is particular to this region. But this, if we just step away from the state side, or even as a patron of the church of St. Ambrose in Milan, we get several of these images. By 1298, he is officially decreed by Pope Boniface IV, if I remember right, as one of these four doctors of the Western Church, along with Gregory the Great, Jerome, and Augustine. And do you notice what he's doing? This is what all you students, this is what you're pausing on right now, right? To come in, this reading, and not just reading, but contemplating books. This is a relatively rare scene for saints, too, to be seated quietly reading a book. But Ambrose is particularly known for that. He becomes the patron saint of scholars. But it goes even farther back. It goes to Augustine, who tried time and time again to meet with Ambrose, to have some discussions with him. And every time he went there, what do you think Ambrose was doing? Reading a book. That's right. And strangely enough, he was reading it silently. He wasn't reading out loud. Can you imagine reading out loud with all your roommates? Only when you study them. Well, Ambrose's iconography, as we move into the 15th and 16th century, becomes more and more interested in this wise, almost philosopher-like bishop. So look at how long his beard has gotten here, right? And actually the way it's split suggests that he's Eastern, or at least it references these Eastern wise men. That's something to play with in the future. Shown with other saints, here's one from France, for example, and Peter and Paul, and maybe Sebastian or Julian. You might notice too, though, if we go think of that original image, not in the crypt, but in the mosaic, Ambrose is wearing relatively modest clothing. Look at what he's wearing here. The special gloves. I mean, it's like that manicure with the little cup on it. And look at the rich clothes here. And then, of course, his mitre. It's not something he would have actually worn, not to that degree. But it's not just these almost icon-like figures. There are scenes. New biographies were being written. There was a new biography of Ambrose written in the Carolingian period, and again in the 13th century, and again in the 15th century. And we get a number of these stories. What's interesting about this predella, this is a low tone on an altarpiece. You have a combination of Ambrose in his role as a bishop, speaking to his congregation, but over here it's a secular role where he's getting after the Emperor Theodosius. One of the most popular images and stories told again and again in the Byzantine East or the Latin West. He continues to be that supporter of the Milanese state, though. He's the patron. And here he is, while he is holding the scourge of heresy, it is soldiers down below, and he stands within a triumphal arch, right? This is for the promotion of Milan. And this gonfalone would have been carried in procession, celebrating the city. Now, apparently, working for the state causes a lot of stress because he has almost no hair in this image. But we still see that heavy white beard, but in another different role. This one, he's coming to marry, and we have nuns in a convent behind. Now, Ambrose really lived a monastic life himself, and he is also promoting a number of three treatises, really, virginity, and even calling on widows to join the church in this way. So there's a personal connection here between Ambrose and the order. But the last one, when we finally are in Venice, that last one is probably Venetian based on style. That's That's another conversation to have. But this chapel, it comes from Santa Maria Gloriosa dei Frari. So they're one of the larger churches in Venice. It was Franciscan, which might sound familiar now after today's talk. And this is an image that was actually on the right side here, but we're going to the one that was at the back, which is this one. Alvise Vivarini was the primary artist on this. Basquiat finished a number of parts here in probably this upper zone. But what we have, or what it does, is raises a number of questions. It was a monumental, it was in fact at the time the largest altarpiece in Venice. It was about 5 meters tall by 2.5 wide, so it was enormous. It sat up above the altar, and with this perspective, it would have looked like Ambrose was sitting right over your head, almost like you could walk right up to it. When you see Ambrose here, he again holds his standard attribute, the whip, right, the scourge, and he has over here the bishop's staff. But behind him, we have two soldiers, perhaps Gervasius and Protasius, the soldier saints, one holding this sword of state. So he is out in front of the state itself. We do know at this time that the Venetians themselves have just won a great victory in 1502 against the Ottoman Turks. And so perhaps one of the reasons to have Ambrose here is because he's the scourge of heresy, right? There's another possible reason. At this time, the Venice was actually under fire from a number of different powerhouses in the region. Holy Roman Empire, that's what HR means. Milan, France, the Papal States, and they actually go through switching sides a number of times and finally all come out in really the same places where they started. But perhaps that's part of it, that he is supporting the Venetian state. But then we have to wonder, why would the patron saint of Milan be here? Well, this chapel was for the Milanese living in Venice. And once a month, they were to have a procession that went through town. It would end at this altar and celebrate their patron saint. So in one way, having this altarpiece celebrates you as being Milanese, but it also, for the Venetians, celebrates the Milanese support for the Venetian state, the Venetian Republic. So perhaps that's what's going on. And then the last thing, of course, would be personal devotion. If you lived within that realm under the influence of Milan, a number of your sons are named Ambrose. And there are other images that were commissioned by officers whose names were Ambrose. Why not have my patron saint be a part of our church? So it could come back to that. So if we bring the book back into this dialogue, this narrative of images, we don't see any references to state. The notes don't talk about state. There's nothing about conquering. It doesn't include any letters of Ambrose. That survived, and people were reading at this time. That had to deal with Ambrose and Theodosius. It's only about this private devotion. It's about these rules for perhaps the clergy. And here, this major altarpiece for the Milanese in a Franciscan church almost fits very nicely into what Brian has suggested for the book itself. So I hope you can see that we can use images to come back and understand even something like our book that has really very few images. The other thing I hope that helps you think is what our images, now our Ambrose windows gone dark, but what did they say about our own community? Is it what is it about our interest in our patron saint? And don't be fooled about its proximity to mine. It has nothing to do with Ambrose. All right, thank you very much.